As we think about the Father's heart for Kansas City, we know that his desire that there would be no place left that the gospel has not gone forth, that there would be nobody who has not heard and had an opportunity to turn from their sins and trust in him. And so amongst the 2.2 million people, though, we know that many are far from God. And right here in the heartland of America, many people grow up and don't even have an opportunity to hear the gospel. Whether it's their parents' choice to keep them away from church, or they grow up in a community isolated with no access to the gospel. Many people are growing up never having that opportunity. And so what's it going to take for us? It's going to take us to find 220,000 harvest laborers that know how to enter new fields, share the gospel, disciple those who believe, and gather them together in healthy church to multiply their efforts across the city. And so in order to accomplish that, like we mentioned, we go to the church, and we want to go into lostness. And so let me illustrate what this looks like for us here in Kansas City. Here's our city. Here's our map. We have 435 that goes around the city. We have the Missouri River, and then we have state lines. So this side is Missouri, and this side is Kansas. And throughout the metropolitan area, we have existing churches made up of believers that have done great work throughout the history of these churches in reaching lostness. And yet there needs to be a renewed vigor throughout our city to reach more lostness. And so what we provide is simple training for people to begin to live out their identity. And so we'll come in and we'll offer training to a church in order to find and discover those people with a real hunger and appetite to see the Father's heart take place right here in Kansas City. And so as we do that, we find that they begin to make disciples, that they begin to live out that identity, and they begin to reach those around them, whether it's the neighborhoods around the church, whether it's in the workplace or in their own neighborhoods they live, but they begin to make disciples who make disciples. And sure enough, as we make enough disciples, then it turns into we need to plant new churches where the gospel is not. And those churches will plant churches. And so we see that gradually there begins to be local ownership so that more and more people are hearing the gospel in that area. But there may be a segment of the population, there's many segments of the population, I should say, that don't have a gospel witness. And so as we go to them, as we find people of peace who want to trust in Jesus and follow him, we'll plant new churches. And these churches, we'll give them that identity that they're disciple makers, that they are to go and to reach their friends, their family, and they'll begin to live out that identity as well. And sure enough, as they reach people, they'll plant new churches that will plant churches as well. And so we see this happening throughout the city. And ultimately, let's say somebody who's reached here, they live here, but maybe they work up here in the Northland. And so they begin to reach their coworkers up here. And their coworkers begin to share. And there begins to be people hearing the gospel up here as well. And new churches are formed. And likewise, if this church has a relationship with this church down here, then they say, we want to be a part of what you're doing. We see that God is moving in a mighty way, and come help us with this. And so this church now has people that know how to do the work, and they can send them to train this church. And that church can then begin to embrace that identity with with vision and simple tools, that they begin to reach people as well. And they begin to plant new churches that plant new churches that plant new churches. So our goal is that every part of Kansas City, every person would have an opportunity to hear the gospel through legacy churches living out their identity, through planting new churches that are reaching new people, so that everybody would have multiple opportunities to hear the gospel. And as we do this, as we pursue this vision here locally, that this entire map would be filled with red circles, we know that God will do a work within us. That God, as people are discovered, maybe people that are from other countries, maybe people who are born right here in the United States, but God, he'll expand their vision, and he'll call them to the nations. And so not only does this work end right here in Kansas City, but ultimately we begin to send people to the nations, to the UUPGs that are out there, so that there would not just be no place left Kansas City, but there would be no place left throughout the entire earth.